Guys, I am Dr. Monisha. Welcome to One Question at a Time series. Let's move on to today's question. So, the question is, which of the following represents the commonest variation in arteries arising from the arch of aorta? We all know about the arteries arising from the arch of aorta. The option A is absence of brachiocephalic trunk. Option B is left vertebral artery arising from the arch. Option C is presence of retroesophageal subclavian artery, and option D is left common carotid artery arising from the brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, for us to answer this question, we have to have a little bit of idea about the arterial arches. So, a little bit about the arterial arches. So here we have the here we have the endothelial heart tube. The two heart tubes have fused together to form the heart tube. So we have the venous end and the arterial end. The venous end forms a sinus venosus and the arterial end forms a truncus arteriosus. And here we have the three bulges in between: the primitive atrium, the primitive ventricle, and the bulbus cordis. And from the truncus arteriosus, we have the 6 arterial arches for each one of the pharyngeal arches that are seen. 6 arterial arches for each one of the pharyngeal arches that are arching around the pharynx and ending up into the right and left dorsal aorta. Okay, so we have the 6 arterial arches. Like that of the pharyngeal arches, the 5th arterial arch is going to be rudimentary. It doesn't appear or regresses immediately after it appears. So, one another picture showing the arterial arches around the pharynx ending up into the dorsal aorta. Okay, the 6 arterial arches from the arterial end of the heart tube. Here we have the venous end of the heart tube. So, one another picture, okay, showing the arterial end of the heart tube, the truncus arteriosus, getting divided by a spiral septum right between the 5th and the 6th arterial arch. The spiral septum is going to divide right between the 5th and the 6th arterial arch. So, the first 5 arches are going to have its connection with the ascending aorta, and the 6th arterial arch is going to have its connection with the pulmonary trunk. So that the division of the spiral septum is such that the first 5 arterial arches has its connection with the aorta, and the 6th arterial arch, which later on develops into the pulmonary artery, has its connection with the pulmonary trunk. So we'll see about the fate of each one of the arteries. So another picture showing the first 5 arterial arches. So here we have the truncus arteriosus divided into the ascending aorta and the pulmonary trunk. Here we have the aortic sac, the right and the left horn of the aortic sac. Okay, so what happens is the first the first arch disappears except for a small part that becomes a maxillary artery. The second arch also disappears except for a small part that remains as stapedial artery. Okay, the first arch remnant is maxillary artery. The second arch remnant is stapedial artery. What about the third arch? The third arch, both on the right and the left side, has the same fates. Okay? The third arch becomes the common carotid artery, and it gives a sprout which becomes the external carotid artery, and then the rest of it becomes the internal carotid artery along with the dorsal aorta. Okay, the third arch, both on the right and the left side, has the same fates. Okay, the initial part becomes the common carotid artery. It gives off a sprout which becomes the external carotid artery, and the remaining part of the third arch becomes the internal carotid artery along with the dorsal aorta. Okay, so the third arch fate is the common carotid artery, external carotid artery, and internal carotid artery. Now the blood flow in the third arch is in the upper direction, and the blood flow in the fourth arch is in the downward direction. So the part of the dorsal aorta between the third and the fourth arch regresses. Okay, the part of the dorsal aorta between the third and the fourth arch, which is called as the ductus caroticus, that regresses. Okay, so this one another thing you should remember. So do you get it? Now let us see about the fourth arch. The fourth arch has a different fate on the right and the left side. Okay, so this portion is going to get disappeared because of the differences in blood flow between the third and the fourth arches. Okay, now the fourth arch on the right side, okay, along with the dorsal aorta and the right seventh intersegmental artery, is going to become the right subclavian artery, whereas the fourth arch on the left side is going to become a part of arch of aorta. When I am saying it is going to become a part of arch of aorta, there are other contributions to the arch of aorta. We will see about it later. First, let us see about the fourth arch. On the right side, it is going to contribute to the right subclavian artery along with the dorsal aorta and the right seventh intersegmental artery. On the left side, it is going to form the arch of aorta. What about the left subclavian artery? The seventh cervical intersegmental artery alone forms the left subclavian artery. It has no other contribution. What are the other contributions of the arch of aorta? So as I said before, we have the right and the left horn of the aortic sac. So the right horn of the aortic sac is going to form the right brachiocephalic trunk, otherwise called as the innominate artery. Okay, brachiocephalic trunk. The right horn of the aortic sac is going to form the brachiocephalic trunk. The left horn of the aortic sac, the fourth arterial arch, and along with the dorsal aorta, is going to form the arch of aorta. Okay, the arch of aorta is formed from three sources: the left horn of the aortic sac, the fourth arterial arch, and a part of dorsal aorta. These three things are going to form the arch of aorta. As we all know, the fifth arterial arch disappears immediately after it forms or doesn't appear at all. What about the sixth arterial arch? It is going to end up in the pulmonary trunk. So, as we all know, the sixth arterial arch is going to contribute to the formation of pulmonary artery. But what happens to the distal part of the sixth arch? Okay, the ventral part develops into the pulmonary artery. Okay, the initial part. The distal part regresses on the right side. Regresses on the right side. I will show you a picture. But on the left side, the distal part maintains its connection with the future arch of aorta. And this connection is called as what? Ductus arteriosus. Ductus arteriosus. And when it becomes rudimentary, it is called ligamentum arteriosum. Okay. So this is about the 6 arterial arches. So here we have a detailed picture. The first arch forming the maxillary artery and its branches. The second arch forming the stapedial artery. The third arch forming the common carotid artery, external carotid artery, establishing its connection with the maxillary artery and the stapedial artery, and internal carotid artery. Okay, the third arch forming the external common carotid artery, external carotid artery, and the internal carotid artery. As I said before, the connection between the third and the fourth arch, the ductus caroticus, disappears because of the differences in the direction of the blood flow. Coming to the fourth arterial arch, on the right side, it is going to form the right subclavian artery, and on the left side, it is going to contribute to the arch of aorta. The right horn of the aortic sac, this portion is going to form the right brachiocephalic trunk, and the left horn of the aortic sac, it is going to contribute to the formation of arch of aorta along with the fourth arterial arch and along with the dorsal aorta. And about the left subclavian artery, the seventh cervical intersegmental artery alone is going to contribute to the left subclavian artery. Okay, and about the sixth arch, see here you have the pulmonary trunk, and here you have the right and the left pulmonary artery. So the distal part of the sixth arterial arch has regressed on the right side, whereas on the left side it maintains its connection with the arch of aorta. The connection is called as ductus arteriosus in fetal life and ligamentum arteriosum in later life. Okay, so the part of the right dorsal aorta post your seventh cervical intersegmental artery regresses on the right side, whereas on the left side it persists and forms the descending thoracic aorta. Okay, so these are the derivatives of the arterial arches. Okay, so finally we have the arch of aorta, and here you have the brachiocephalic trunk with its right subclavian artery and right common carotid artery, and then here you have the left common carotid artery, and here you have the left subclavian artery. So this is a basic structure of the aortic arch and its branches. Now, what are the major variations that can happen? Most important variation that can happen is the bovine aortic arch, where the left common carotid artery takes a common origin along with the brachiocephalic trunk. Okay, so as we saw before, if this is arch of aorta, here is your brachiocephalic trunk, and the left common carotid artery has a separate origin. Now, when it has a common origin along with the brachiocephalic trunk, now that is a very common variation, and that kind of aortic arch is called as the bovine arch variation. The left common carotid artery has a common point of origin as the brachiocephalic trunk or the innominate artery, or has its origin from the brachiocephalic trunk itself. Okay, it has a common origin or from the brachiocephalic trunk itself. This is the most common variation observed, the bovine arch variation. And what is this is the first most common variation. The third most common variation observed is the left vertebral artery. The vertebral artery usually arises from the left subclavian artery, but if the left vertebral artery has its origin from the aorta itself, now that is a common variation, but third most common variation. Okay, and one another common variation is the abnormal origin of the right subclavian artery. Okay, now as we all know, the right subclavian artery has its origin from the fourth arterial arch. Now, if the fourth arterial arch regresses and instead the right side of the dorsal aorta persists, the right dorsal aorta along with the right seventh intersegmental artery forms the right subclavian artery. Now, imagine here is your esophagus, pharynx. Here is your pharynx. So, if the right dorsal aorta is going to persist, so there are chances of compression of the pharynx. Yes or no? There are chances of compression of the pharynx. Here is your pharynx, and if the here is your pharynx, okay, and if the right dorsal aorta is going to persist to form the abnormal right subclavian artery, chances are that it might compress the esophagus, leading on to dysphagia. And what is the dysphagia called? It has a specific name. Please comment in the comment section about the dysphagia being called in the abnormal right subclavian artery. Now, you see, the even if there is an abnormal right subclavian artery, the pharynx will not be fully compressed. Okay, the pharynx here will not be fully compressed because it has some gap left behind here. Okay, what if there isn't a gap here? What if something is persistent here? So you also please comment in the comment section what will complete the ring. Which structure, if persistent, will complete this ring and can cause a greater dysphagia? Okay, comment please. So coming back to the question, which of the following is the most common variation? The most common variation is a bovine arch type, where the right common carotid artery has a common origin from the brachiocephalic trunk or comes from the brachiocephalic trunk itself. Okay, and the vertebral artery arising from the arch is a third most common, and presence of retroesophageal subclavian artery is also a variation but not that common. Okay, so we have talked about some of the variations. Now tell me, which will be the second most common variation in the arteries arising from the arch of aorta? We all know about that artery. We have read about it. It is the second most common variation. Comment in the comment section. Okay, thank you guys. Let us see again with another interesting question. Thank you.